Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 189, season 4, episode 29. It is good to be back. I was away for last week. I took a weekend off. It doesn't happen, but I have to say that it was definitely worthwhile for me. I felt very much that I got what I needed out of it. I felt like we needed a break from each other, maybe a little bit. But personally and honestly, it felt very much the sense that during the holiday there was really a need to separate and disconnect from all things. So even as an example, the practice I have developed of writing every day on LinkedIn, which I started in January. I took a break from that too for 2 weeks. So a week off from the podcast, 2 weeks off from the writing. I wanted the urgency to be back, the energy to be back in the presentation, and taking a break sometimes really does that. I didn't want the material to feel stale. I felt like I was trudging along a little bit, and I really wanted to be back in full force. So we're back, episode 189. Portion of the week is known as a portion called Acharei Mot. It opens up after the period and the death of the sons of Aaron. Our topic of the week is scapegoats. But first, the win and the learning of the week. The win of the week is actually not my win, but a win that I'm very proud of and a win that I'm happily connected to, and that is my wife's 9th anniversary at her place of work here in Israel. It is by no means a given that anyone stays anywhere for any given amount of time. I know personally I have not worked anywhere longer than, I think, 4.5 years, 5 years at the most. But 9 years at the same place, the nature of the work, how it happened, how it came to be is really an incredible story, actually. But to get to 9 years, to be in that place for 9 years, to see that place develop, the success that it has brought to bear, and to see her role in it as a leader and as a force in that organization, bringing on the team, teaching and educating and training and pushing and working and putting in time and effort and passion and energy and hours and hours and hours to get it to where it is at the moment is worthy of celebration. And it's a win because you want to celebrate the wins of the people that are around you and not just your own wins. I think there's something to that. And to celebrate them for them and maybe a little bit to celebrate it for your role in it, if there's any at all, other than maybe belief and some motivation and being there in maybe some tougher moments or some difficult moments or whatever it may be, but to really enjoy someone else's victories and someone else's wins is a big deal. So kudos to you, Naomi, on that. Super proud, as I said to you yesterday, and can't wait to see where it goes next. That's the win of the week. The learning of the week is an important one for me as well. In the work that I do in coaching, sometimes you have to share tough feedback and tough news with a client, with a leader, and that's not always easy. And at the same time that it's not easy, it's still vital and important that the person get the feedback that they need to hear and then can work on what they need to work on. And so that was a really key learning for me this week. One of my clients, in sharing with them some important and what I would say is honest and open critique of them as a leader in their role at their organization, and finding the right way to do that and giving them the space to read it, hear it, accept it, work it through without judgment, and even take some feedback in return because you know that it's coming. I remember years ago in doing a 360 with someone, an assessment, the 360 assessment with someone, there's a lot of time that a person needs after they read what it is that others have said about them. They're saying it about them to improve them, but they're still saying it about them. And so it's important that people are given the time and the space to appreciate what that is and then go on from there. So the win of the week is Naomi's win at the 9th anniversary at work. And the learning is with respect to giving criticism, how to give criticism, and how to share feedback in a way that is measurable and appropriate and effective for the short term and the long term for that person. Okay, the topic of the week is scapegoats If you are like me and you're a sports fan, then scapegoats are something that come up all the time. When they fire a coach or let a GM go, sometimes it's because they've done a bad job, and sometimes it's because they're simply the one to blame. And they get the blame because maybe they have the highest profile, but they also get the most blame. In sports, famously for me as a sports fan, as a Mets fan, Bill Buckner in 1986 is one of the more famous scapegoats in sports history for having the ball roll through his legs and making an error in Game 6 of that World Series. Mets win Game 6, go on to win Game 7. He is the GOAT, the old term for the GOAT. He's the scapegoat, the one to be blamed for that loss. Also famously, Steve Bartman, the Chicago Cubs in 2003, when he interfered as a fan in the stands on a foul ball with the Chicago Cubs being 5 outs away from the World Series, what appeared to be a good team on its way maybe to a World Series championship for the first time in a bazillion years, and he interfered on that play. They lose the game, they lose the next game, they get eliminated. The world blames Steve Bartman to the point where that night Steve Bartman was held for safety underneath the stadium at Wrigley Field before he was allowed to go home because of fear for his life. So scapegoats exist in those spaces, and this exists in a lot of different places. And the reason it comes up obviously in this week's conversation is because in the portion of the week, we do get the detailed event ritual for Yom Kippur, the Day of Repentance, which includes the scapegoat. It's called in Hebrew the Seir La'azazel. It's one of two matching animals, one that was used as an offering in the temple and one that was used as an offering that went over the side of a cliff. It's really beautifully, I'm not sure that's the right term, but powerfully depicted in the Talmud and in Midrashic literature, and also in the liturgy for Yom Kippur itself, how that event took place. But effectively, upon throwing the animal over the cliff, the people of Israel then, quote unquote, cleansed of their sins. And that animal is known as the scapegoat. It's an interesting thing to think about how that worked and why that worked. It's one of the, I would say, more complex and difficult and even odd rituals that we have in trying to understand how that works. It doesn't seem in keeping with a lot of other things that we do in our practice, but it is one that it's there. But over the course of history, scapegoating became obviously something a lot worse. And so when we try to appreciate what's going on, we have to appreciate what scapegoating is and what it isn't and how really dangerous it can actually be. Okay. So what actually is scapegoating? Right? Let's define terms. Basically, when you're scapegoating is the idea that you are placing blame somewhere else, right? Placing blame somewhere else for something that you are responsible for, something that is your fault, something that you are to blame for. All those different things. So it's an important thing to sort of think about what it is, right? So scapegoating in a lot of environments can be explained in a lot of different ways, but the basics of it is, let's say for the sake of argument here, let's say you're in a team environment or work environment. So scapegoating in a team would be consistently attributing blame to one or more of the team members, regardless of their actual level of responsibility. Basically, you're deflecting, as I said, deflecting attention and accountability from other members or something deeper, which is something maybe systemic that's going on. As it's going on in the world right now, and the reason why it's obviously a topic of discussion at the moment is because basically it feels like, and this is not new, that our people are being scapegoated for all the ills of the world, except that it's changed ever so slightly from maybe the Jewish people to the Zionists, and that we're responsible for all the ills that are existing in the world. The ambassador to the state of Israel stood up this week in the United Nations and talked very passionately, very powerfully, very appropriately about the hypocrisy of all of this, of blaming Israel for everything, blaming the Jews for everything, blaming Zionism for everything, and laying blame at no one else's feet. There are occasions when scapegoating is what I'll call unconscious or subconscious, and there are many occasions when it's very conscious. So when a leader is clearly at fault and blames others on the team, and even goes so far as to provide evidence for that person's role in that mess, disaster, failure, even if they don't have it, that's a conscious version of it. The subconscious version of it may be somebody who is not aware of why it is that they think someone is guilty or responsible or accountable for something, but is placing that blame there, and it's coming from something else or something deeper inside. But it's there. And so the scapegoating thing that's going on right now is, it's an abomination, right? It's despicable. And it's happening at a lot of levels in a lot of places. So on the highest levels, it's happening at a governmental level. And as you go down sort of the layers in society, it's moving from there into, just cultural. It's then moving down into communal. It's on campuses now in a big way. It's obviously in media in a massive way. What I like to say all the time is that it says actually very little about me or us. It says a whole lot about you and how you think and what you think and where you assign blame and where you don't, and who you assign responsibility and accountability for it and who you don't. So very often has almost nothing to do with me. Scapegoating always finds its power. There's a great quote that I saw. The scapegoat has always had the mysterious power of unleashing man's ferocious pleasure in torturing, corrupting, and befouling. It's really not that complicated when you think about what's actually happening, because that's really what it is. The pursuit of it, the finding of the scapegoat, the ability to blame that person. So what's happening, right? The psychology of it is, it feels good. I read an article on LinkedIn about this. It feels good to lay blame at the feet of somebody else, to not be responsible for that failure, disaster, even if the person you're blaming bears no responsibility whatsoever. It's a form of deflection. It's a form of, on some level, projection. It's a form of narcissism. There's a lot of literature that connects scapegoating to narcissism and narcissistic behavior. And by virtue of doing that, you're protecting yourself from the blame or from consequence in that situation. So when it comes to work, when it comes to teams, when it comes to being a leader, there are effectively three aspects to think about here with respect to scapegoating. There's the leader's role in it, what the leader has to do to maybe uproot it or get rid of it. There are the people in the team who are fomenting it and pushing it and laying the blame. And then there's the person who is the scapegoated individual, the person who's basically in the work environment, whose career is on the line. In other environments, it could be even more dangerous, right? If it's societal, so then if they're the reason for all the ills of society, like you might say the case of the Jews in the period of the Black Death, that has a real detrimental impact on a person's ability to continue to live. So you have to sort of, like in a lot of things we've talked about, manage all the pieces on some sort of like a chess sort of approach, but also appreciate that if you're the one being brought in to help uncover this, you are in a very difficult spot, because ultimately you could be blamed for scapegoating. So what ends up happening in a work environment is they'll blame the CEO, they'll blame a team leader, they'll blame a team member and say, well, if that person wasn't here anymore, or they were moved into a different department or a different role, then we would be better. If that CEO was replaced, then we got a CEO who was, he was X, Y, or Z, and she is A, B, and C, then for sure all those problems would go away, right? And so you become myopic about it, and you zoom in on it, and you focus in really on the wrong thing, and instead of focusing on where it actually belongs, you allow this mechanism to offload all of the emotions and the responsibilities on somebody else. In many cases, it can create some sort of a mob mentality, which is, again, what you're seeing on some of these campus environments, is this incredible mob type of mentality that's going on. And so we have to think about how that's playing out, what that's doing, how hurtful, how painful, how dangerous it actually is. And as I mentioned earlier, the ability to see that in history, not just in sports. Sports is like light in comparison to the Black Death, the Dreyfus Affair. I mean, even business, which may be even more dangerous than there. So you need to come up with a plan and an approach as a leader, which allows you, either as an incoming consultant or coach, or as a person who is on the team who is tasked with understanding this, as to how you uproot it and replace it with a culture that is more positive and more focused. The obvious thing that's going on here is if you don't work on this, you breed a culture of negativity, of just basically closing off trust and the ability to be creative, and basically people leave at that point and you're dead in the water. Really, there's nothing left at that point. So here's what I'll call the clear leadership plan. It's a 6-step process that I'll call the clear leadership plan. Number 1, cultivate clarity. You want to be a leader that's creating clarity in the team, which is constructive feedback on a regular basis. Not once in a blue moon, and not never, and not swept under the rug. I've seen this in action. This was great. There's a version of this which I'm going to apply here, which was immediate feedback. I was on an interview once for a job years ago. I thought the interview went really, really well. I was really happy with my performance at the interview. And the interviewer, when it was over, said, okay, I'm going to give you immediate feedback. I was like, whoa, what is that? And just on the spot, 3 points about my performance during the course of the interview, which on some level set the direction of what my expectations might be going forward, but also was really appreciated that this is what they picked up from me during the course of the conversation, for good and for bad. But I think that you can have that kind of sort of a no surprise feedback system in the team. It doesn't have to get to the point where it's sort of like absolute and brutal honesty to the level of painful, but you don't want it to accumulate over time. So maybe that's a weekly conversation. Maybe it's a immediate post project, an AAR, an after action report, but really cultivate that clarity and don't leave any ambiguity in there. That's number 1. Number 2, you want to lead with accountability. So first was clarity. Now you want to lead with accountability. You want to promote personal responsibility within the team. So what's the practical move here? You want to start meetings with, like I do this, not necessarily that, but it's like I do this with you every week, is a lesson learned or a win or a learning that comes up that's personal, that people can share. That can be a win, that can be a loss, that can be a learning. People can share a mistake that they made in the week. They can open it up. I remember that sort of radical candor at a meeting 5 years ago, maybe at this point. I was working at a company. Someone on the team had messed up actually rather royally, and came to the senior team meeting and owned it. Just really owned it. And that was an amazing lesson learned, not only because the person owned it, but because the way the team responded to that person owning it. It really fostered the right environment that you might be looking for. So that's 2. So first you have clarity, then you have accountability. Then you want to educate and engage. So you want to teach on this. You want to talk about this, about cognitive biases, EQ, emotional intelligence, bringing in people from the outside, training, speakers, workshops that get into the deep on these kinds of things for people to work on this so that you can uproot it and again replant a different kind of culture on your team. Number 4 would be action on your mistakes. Develop some protocols that focus on understanding the errors rather than blaming on the errors. No blame, understanding. Let's see why this happened, what happened, how it happened, why it happened, without assessing blame. And then you can create a solutions team or solutions room around fixing that so that when it happens again or maybe comes up, that you're ahead of the ball on that and you're ready to roll on that. I just have one more that I want to share, 2 more, quickly. Reinforce relationships. You want to build strong interpersonal relationships and connections through team building like we talk about a lot of the time, but the ability when you're doing team meetings to also do team building is really important. That helps foster the trust, helps foster the communication, helps foster people being accountable and responsible and open with each other in that space. You want to reinforce that in between, not just in those meetings where a person shares a winning or a learning or a massive faux pas. But in between, which is where it then becomes possible in the future. And then number 6, an example of excellence. You want to be the leader who's exemplifying integrity or fairness, or you want to be the coach or the consultant who's helping the leader be an example of excellence, integrity, and fairness. So how do you do that? Talk about an experience that you had where you handled something in, from a manner of fairness and accountability, from a place of respect and trust, rather than from a place of anger and distrust and bias. And then you can share that with the team. You can put it in a Slack channel. You can put it in a team, if you do a team-wide meeting. You can do it in an email to everyone and say, hey, I just want to share this. Went through this. It was hard. This is how I handled it. I feel like it was good. You don't have to share back, but this is an example. By having sort of a very clear strategy on this and a clear leadership plan on this, you can work on the scapegoating issue because, let's be honest, it comes up in a lot of places. It shows its very ugly head in a lot of circumstances, and sometimes we're paying attention to it and sometimes we're not. And if we're playing the role of the leader, then it is our responsibility. It is part of our role to nip it in the bud, catch it out front, and do everything we can to get rid of it and replace it with a culture of success and wins. To finish it out, like we always do, quote of the week from someone by the name of David Roppo. I'm definitely butchering that last name. I apologize. The man who continually searches for a scapegoat in the end shall become the shepherd of his own isolation with no one to blame but himself. That is coaching the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week when we hit episode 190.